Welcome to Cirone on Schools, a production of the Santa Barbara County Education Office. It is my privilege to introduce the host and creator of Cirone on Schools, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, Bill Cirone.
I'm Bill Cirone, Santa Barbara County Superintendent of Schools, and I'm pleased to introduce my guest today, Kate Carter, the founder and executive director of LifeChronicles. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Bill.
Kate, we want to talk about all the important work you do in terms of helping families heal and come together in a time of crisis. But before we do that, I'd like to trace the path that you took to founding LifeChronicles, because in so many ways it's interrelated. So let's go back to the very beginning. And I understand that you were born and raised, you were born in Texas and raised in Chicago. And then when you were 13, your parents made what you felt was a huge decision that was rather abrupt and unfair. What was that?
Well, it's really funny. I was not a diary keeper per se, but I did find this old diary that I had. You know, everybody was giving people diaries when they were 12 and 13 back then. And I found this entry in there. There weren't long entries ever, but there was one entry that said, "They can't make me stay here. I'm not staying." Because I just thought, you know, I did get pulled out. You know, I'd just been elected vice president in my junior high. I was looking forward to school starting in the fall, and boom, we were gone. And so to come here was shocking, but within a year, I was vice president of my new school, and not to mention, I fell in love with California. Who couldn't love the beach and the mountains?
Your new school was in San Fernando Valley.
Yes, Reseda High School.
Yeah, and I also understand that your high school drama teacher was one of your most important early mentors. How did he help you?
Well, you know, and he's still a very close friend of mine. He was Kevin Spacey's drama teacher as well. He's an incredible teacher. I think the most important thing he did for all of us that were his students was that we fell in love. First of all, he taught us to fall in love with Shakespeare, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do with kids that age. But he also really instilled in us the idea that we could do anything. And what he and I had fun sharing a few years ago was my realization that when he chose me to be the student director of the play 1984 by Orwell, not my favorite material, I was really stunned. I was a performer. You know, I performed on stage in the Shakespeare Festival at UCLA, won first place there, and in the individual categories in the Fall Festival in Los Angeles, which I absolutely loved. And so when he picked me to be a student director, I was really surprised. I was a little girl then. I was really little girl, and if you looked at me, who picked me? You know, this little performer. But I fell in love with it, and it was years later that I realized when I did my television internship, and certainly when I started the work with LifeChronicles, that he had created a love of production in me, and I realized where my talents were. You know, my talents were production very much. Not that I couldn't do theater. I often fantasize that someday I'll go into community theater again, but I really fell in love with production. When I was in that control booth and directing the sound and the stage and everything, I was just in heaven.
So what was the path you took to Santa Barbara?
Let's see. Well, my boyfriend in high school was going to UCSB, and then we got married a few years later, and I moved here. I moved here shortly before. I worked here in data processing in 1971, which was really the early days of all that. And I didn't love Santa Barbara at the beginning because when I came back, after I got divorced, which nobody wants to get divorced, but it wasn't a happy time for me in Santa Barbara the first time. But when I came back in 1980, it's been fantastic ever since.
And I understand you were self-employed at one point, working from home, and Oprah Winfrey started telling her television viewers to follow their bliss. That upset you, didn't it?
You remember everything. Yes, I mean, back in the days, in the early 90s, I would say, if I had to think back, she had this kind of recurring theme to follow your bliss, and I used to stand in front of the TV, and sometimes I just wanted to jump up and down and say, I would follow it if I knew what it was. I have no idea what it is. Tell me what it is. Didn't know.
So how did you find out? Maybe a better question is, what events yet led you to start LifeChronicles in 1998?
Well, you know, it went further back than that when I really started to look at it. Probably when you asked me a question on another show, Bill, that's probably when I started to think about it. But I thought about it because I knew it went further back than even 1998. I had lost a friend in 1980, a friend of 23 years, and no, in 1990, I'm sorry, in 1990. And I was 40 years old, and I just remember at that time thinking, boy, if you don't know what it is you want to do with your life, you better figure it out, because clearly we don't get a choice in that. And I just felt really strongly that I needed to figure out what this was. And it was through a series of coincidences, and I don't even know how it happened, I ended up doing a television internship at Channel 17. And I remember coming home from one of my first classes and saying to my husband, oh boy, I'm home. Because everything about it fit for me, except that when I finished the internship, I had friends really pushing me, what are you going to do with this? They thought I was good at it. And I said, yeah, I really love it, but I'm not interested in commercial television. I want to do something meaningful with it. And if you've seen good television or film, you know how powerful it can be, the impact it can have on a person in a positive way. And that's what I wanted, but I still didn't know what that was. So when Terry, my friend, told me that she was dying and had a short time to live, her doctors had told her to get her affairs in order. Her husband had only been gone from ALS about a year. And I just walked around for days thinking, what can I do? What can I do? And it just came to me. And I called her and I said, Terry, I want to sit you in front of a camera and I want you to tell the children everything you want them to know for the rest of their lives. And I'm not the smartest person on the planet. It was a couple months later that the light went on and I went, oh, this is that thing that I could do. And a month after that, the day that Terry died, I actually called Gail Rink at hospice and said, Gail, this is what I'm going to do.
Well, you've just defined Life Chronicles, but for someone who has never heard of Life Chronicles before, how would you define it to a layperson?
Well, you know, what's funny though, Bill, is it's changed over the years, and so we define it more clearly now, I think, than we did in the beginning. In the beginning, I thought it was about memories, and it is about memories, but it's about more than that now. It's become a therapeutic tool for families at the end. And truthfully, when families call us, we don't usually talk in depth about what we're going to cover. They come to us. You know, we've never marketed Life Chronicles. And we've done 1,100 videos, and we've never marketed Life Chronicles. We have a website, but we haven't done outreach or anything like that. They've come to us. And because they have this need to be remembered, but what we know is we also, in that opportunity with them, in that moment in time, we can cover some bases that perhaps the family hasn't covered yet and help them tie up some loose ends and make some connections that will be lasting after they're gone.
Well, I know you had mentioned you've taped 1,100 people, and I know that's been all over the country, all over in Europe and in Canada as well. But I also know that you have a very small staff, and you use volunteers very effectively. How do you organize the volunteers and staff to do the work they do and have the penetration that you have?
Well, it helps to have people who come to us and are just really enthralled with what we're doing. They feel deeply that this is important. They want to participate. They want to be able to help these families at a very difficult time, and that makes a big difference. But we're really lucky. We have a team on the East Coast that digs in when they can. The only time I travel there more now, although I do travel there a lot, is when we have often agencies call, you know, the University of Minnesota or Dana-Farber at Harvard. They will call and they'll have one person that needs to be taped. But within a few days when we get there, they normally got 4 or 5. And that's difficult for my East Coast team to do. You know, they're working young families who can do 1 or 2 tapes in a weekend, but if you string them out, they just can't cover that. So we have teams of people in different places, and but now we've created a new way to cover this because the requests are coming so hard and fast, and we knew this day would come. But now what's happened is these agencies have come to us, Dana-Farber at Harvard, University of Minnesota Bone Marrow Transplant Department, Santa Cruz Hospice, and Central Iowa Hospice all came to us a few months ago within weeks of each other and said, we want to be able to offer this to our patients on a regular basis, and we know you can't be here all the time. We want to have training. And we had already talked about creating a certification program to teach not just the equipment, because truthfully the equipment's the easy part these days. You can do a lot with good equipment that doesn't require a whole lot of experience, and it's much simpler than it used to be to have something good. But what we know needs to be trained is how do you walk into those situations, very highly charged situations, and help these people become relaxed with you and trust you enough to allow you to lead them through not just their life stories, but perhaps cover some ground before they're gone.
And walking into those situations, I've been very impressed with some of the very powerful stories about the impact of the work itself on your teenage volunteers. Tell us about that.
Well, you know what's an interesting thing is 2 weeks after I actually said, this is the day we start Life Chronicles, I met with 7 of my friends who, most of them are still involved with Life Chronicles in one way or another after 16 years. And we sat down to flesh this out. What could we do? What would it look like? And what would it be composed of? And we went back a year later into the computer, and we found the minute or the notes from that meeting. It wasn't minutes, but notes. And the last item that was listed there was student volunteers, especially high school kids. And we felt that there was no question these were going to be very profound experiences, but positive, profound experiences. And as we talked about who would benefit most from doing this, because believe me, I have adult volunteers. We have regular calls from people who want to volunteer who are adults, and we do have adult volunteers. But we really try to involve students as much as possible because the impact is so big and long-lasting. And you know it when you have interns who have been with you for 16 years.
Yeah. And you know, in the beginning, the videos were mostly about elderly people. There's been a subtle change through the years, and that there's include more younger people now. Explain that to us.
Well, you know, it's actually, I think back on why that was at the beginning. I think at the beginning, the idea was just really, really new, and people couldn't quite wrap their heads around it. And then the more we did of those, and our focus is still seniors and seriously ill, and sometimes they're both. But now I would say more than half, far more than half of our videos are dying young parents. And a lot of that is these agencies who've realized not only will this have therapeutic impact for their patient, give them peace of mind before they go, but it'll have a huge therapeutic impact on their children. We know that our videos, we were given a study when we first started that showed that by being seen together on camera, whoever remains will remember not just the sight and sound of the person who's gone, but what it felt like to be with them. So imagine being a child who lost a parent. And now we get the letters and the emails, and they come to see us, of young people who were very small when their parent died, and they sit there and they tell us with tears, you have no idea what this means to me. And now I kind of say, well, we do.
And you know, some people who haven't seen the work may be uncomfortable with the idea of videos about death. But really, you're talking about life. Aren't the videos really an affirmation of life?
Thank you. That's exactly right. I often have said to people, this is called Life Chronicles, not Death Chronicles. And I think that's perhaps sometimes people might misunderstand that we are taping people as they are dying. Now, we did do a video for Dana-Farber Cancer Center in Boston last December, a year ago December, of a young mother whose children were 4, 3, and 7 months old. And we taped her at 10 in the morning, and she did pass at 6 p.m. But that wasn't because anyone waited. It was because things happened so quickly for her, and all of the staff and her physician and everyone knew that she had desperately wanted to do a video before she was gone for her children. And we got there within 36 hours of the call, and that video was done. And if you watched it, it's not sad and depressing. And she's far more invigorated than you would ever imagine, because it's very empowering for a person who knows that they don't have much time to be able to do this one last act. And I say it's all about courage and love. That's why it's such an honor to be with these families, because this person has the courage to face their mortality and do this for their family because of their great love for them.
And you've also made a great point that the videos truly depict reality as opposed to the so-called reality TV shows.
Exactly.
So tell us what you mean by that.
Well, you know, CBS Evening News came and did a piece on us in 2005, I believe it was, and they ended the piece by saying, this is the reality, this is the real reality TV, the reality that matters. And boy, you know, that was one of those, I think I must be a jumping up and down person, because again, I wanted to jump up and down and say exactly. And the best part about our work is not only is it reality, but it's beautiful and it's powerful and it's positive. There's nothing negative about it. The families that we tape, you know, I just did a family by Skype the other day because some of the family members we had to do right away, but I'm going up to Northern California to tape the rest of the family on Sunday. And it's such an amazing thing to see them at first kind of nervous and tentative and just not knowing what to make of this. And within a very short period of time, it's like a light goes on and you see them realize, wow, this is so great. We really need this.
And you've also pointed out that initially the recordings were considered more like a family scrapbook. And now they've become much more what you've been talking about. They've really truly become therapeutic tools.
Exactly. And as a result, I met with the chief of psychiatry at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York, which is the most funded cancer center in the world. It was really an honor to be with Dr. Breitbart. And after 2 hours, we were told we had an hour with him, but after 2 hours, we had to call the meeting. We had a taping to go to. But he was still interested in speaking to us. But the biggest recommendation he had was that we have a study done to quantify the therapeutic value of what we do. We've known for years that it has therapeutic value. The families have told us repeatedly. But we're really thrilled that Dr. Julie Taguchi, who's a local oncologist here in Santa Barbara, a very admired oncologist here in Santa Barbara, is spearheading that study to quantify the therapeutic value of what we do.
Another big change, I guess we could call it part of the maturing of Life Chronicles, has to do with the referrals you receive. It used to be word of mouth, mostly by locals. That's not the case anymore, is it?
No, and we were a little hesitant at first about any media. We were on the front page of the Chicago Tribune after the first year, but that brought us a Chicago team that we've had forever, which was pretty great. And we've been on other media, and that's the times that we've had when we started getting calls from out of the area, really, except that word of mouth. But we still have a lot of people who search for us on the internet. The couple of calls we just got from London, both of those were people who had looked on the internet for someone to please help us do this. But the interesting thing now is with the rising of palliative care, and certainly the understanding of what palliative care is in our country and the world, Life Chronicles has become a real part of that. We got a call from the director of social workers at Dana-Farber while I was doing several tapings in Boston in November. And she said, we want to talk to you about training for our people. She said, our cancer center has moved in with our palliative care department, and every day we meet and say, what more can we do for these families? And Life Chronicles is at the top of the list. That was pretty great to hear.
Certainly is. And I know the high level of recognition has also led to a new milestone, an exciting one, and it has to do with the training and certification program that you've launched. Talk to us about that.
Well, we have an excellent team that's putting it together, people who've worked in social work, worked in the medical field, and worked in certainly what it's like to do certification and trainings, which is not my experience. So I need these people to guide us through this. What I do know how to do, though, is to teach people how to walk into that very delicate situation. So we will be training agencies to begin with. We've talked about training individuals, but right now we're going to focus on training these agencies so that their staff can provide these services. We will probably continue to do editing. Anyone who knows video knows it's a huge chunk of time to do editing, and we will probably continue to do the editing in Santa Barbara.
And recently, Life Chronicles began a project based on the advice you received from the Chief of Psychiatry at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. Tell us about the quantification study and why it's important to you.
Well, the quantification study is pretty exciting. I've been hearing things about what they've been doing. They're literally going to do cortisol testing to check stress levels and to see what benefit the videos are bringing to the families. It's going to be very interesting. But it's going to be important to us, probably mostly for funding, so that these funders of foundations and so forth can fully appreciate that there's actually a therapeutic value to what we do, not just memories. And there's not a lot of understanding out there, and so to have a study that will really lay that out clearly will be really important to us.
And a related goal, which you've had for some time, is to develop a website called LifeSpace. Talk about that goal and why it's so important to you and why you feel passionately that you need to reach it.
Well, it goes kind of back to that reality TV thing that you were talking about earlier. When you do this kind of work and it's profound and you're using technology for something that's meaningful, you watch a lot of what the broadcasting is these days, and you certainly see the effect on young people, and you worry about the effect on little ones of the messages that are really poor messages. Of the value systems are not in place. They're not good for us. To have material that's the polar opposite of that, and all of a sudden we realized one day, really after taping Father Virgil Cordano, who just the idea of being with this man who was so rich with experience and wisdom and such a profound person, it dawned on us, we were sitting on an archive, a huge archive, a treasure trove of video that could be beneficial to teachers who have a difficult time incorporating values education. And you know, Bill, I've always said I'm not talking controversial values. I'm not talking political or religious values per se. If someone talks about their religion, that's one thing. I'm talking about basic human values. And we need that. We need young people to have a rich exposure to that. And there aren't many better ways to expose that through story. And we have that in spades.
Well, the schools look forward to the day when that website becomes a reality. Also, you know, viewers might be surprised to hear that you create these precious family videos for anyone, regardless of whether they could afford to pay or not. I'm sure that that strains your budget. How does Life Chronicles support itself?
Well, it's very difficult, and no one makes very much money. We have a very tiny staff. I literally, you know, gave up my career and went into something that is not lucrative, but it's so vastly rewarding on a daily basis. We look to people for donations when they can. It was very important to us from day one that no one was turned away for this. I got a call this morning from a physician at Dana-Farber at Harvard this morning, saying that she has a dying patient who needs this, but can you tell me if she can't afford it, can she not have it? And I said, no, that's not an issue. And that's meaningful to us because it's too important for a patient with young children to not have that video, and especially to meet her wish before she's gone, but to meet the needs of her children after she's gone. And that's been the goal from day one. Would it be easier for us to make this a for-profit? Without question, but that's not the right choice for us.
Well, how, if someone was either interested in volunteering or in contributing, or even to consider having if they're in a space where they might want to consider having a chronicle made for a family member, how would they go about contacting you?
Well, they can go to our website, which is www.lifechronicles.org, or they can call our office at 805-682-3411.
Okay, and you know, for 15 years now, you've touched the lives of literally thousands of people in a very remarkable way. But I'm sure that works both ways. Have the lives of the people that you've been taping and working with, how have they touched you?
Well, we just lost one this week who touched me a great deal. There are times when there is someone who I meet them, and often we've not met these people before we show up, you know, so it's not as if there's always been groundwork ahead of time. We don't always have that luxury. But I'm always amazed at how trusting people are once we, you know, get to know them a little bit. And often, there have been times I've longed to become friends with that person. I would think, this is a person I'd choose for a friend in my life. But I had an awakening pretty early in that experience that it was not appropriate, that at that time in their lives, their friends and families need every second they can have with them, and to have someone new step in and take any of that time would not be right. But I'm moved by these people because, as I said before, they have courage, and they have such great love for their families. That's where that courage comes from, and it's very moving to see that.
So what's, as you look back and come right up to the present, what's the best part of your job?
Well, when I got that call this morning, I'd been in the office, you know, many hours last night and this morning, getting ready for our event tonight. And I got that call from a doctor at 10 to 8 in the morning. And I remember getting that call and thinking, this is what it's all about.
And what's the most challenging part?
Oh, the finances. That's the part I don't have any experience with. And I came from a corporate world, and to come into nonprofit world it's still shocking to me.
Well, you're a true leader in the field and in the community. And I want to talk just for a second about leadership. They say some leaders are born and others are made. For you, has leadership been intuitive, or is it something you've had to work on?
It's truthfully nothing I ever thought of. But I've had some mentors in my life over the years. Keith Berry, I was his assistant for 5.5 years when I was 28, which was a pivotal experience for me. This man I very much admire and who's very close and one of our biggest supporters of Life Chronicles, instilled in me a sense of that I was capable of doing whatever I needed to do, that I was intelligent, that I was trustworthy, and I took that and ran with it. It really had a big impact on me. And others in my life have been mentors to me, and have helped me feel like I can lead. But I learned from Keith back in the day that it's important that when you work with people, they fully understand how much you appreciate what they do. They need to be honored and acknowledged for what they do, and I try to do that.
So what are the leadership qualities that you have that you feel are most important?
I'm not sure. I try to have a sense of humor, even in the midst of what we're doing, and be able to shift gears of that, and then get down to business. But I'm a committed person.
And how do you find success? How do you define success?
Well, if you don't have success, I'm with Jackie Kennedy. If you haven't done a good job of raising your children, what good is your life, really? And I've been a mother that loves their children dearly and considers them people I would want for friends. I'm very thrilled with that. And I have a new grandchild who's 23 months old today, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But in my work, it's to have meaning in your work. That's success to me.
And as we wind down, if you could send a brief message to young people today, what would it be?
That don't think of life as a timeline. Don't let people make you think that if you hadn't made certain decisions by certain times in your life. That certainly was not my experience. My experience was when the time was right and I knew what it was, I was able to follow my dream. And don't put yourself into a box.
And how about a message to their parents?
To their parents? I think you need to respect who your children are as people and honor who they are. I think that's important, most important thing of being a parent.
And a message to the community?
I want to say thank you to the community. We could not have done 1,100 videos for families if we hadn't had many wonderful volunteers and supporters who've helped us make this happen.
And finally, if you could send a message to elected officials.
Elected officials. The local officials, I like our local officials, and I think they get a lot done. The major ones, I think we need to have less money in politics and more cooperation.
And finally, you drive hard, you work hard, you put a lot of energy into everything you do. What do you do to relax? How do you find balance?
Well, I don't have a lot of balance. I try to have balance, but when I do, I have time with friends and family. One of the things I learned in my work is I don't use the B word. I don't use the word busy with my friends and my family. That's how I do it.
Well said, well done. Kate, I wish we had more time, but we don't. Thank you so much, not just for being my guest, but for the passion that you bring to the work, for the caring, for the vision and the creativity in creating LifeChronicles, and the tenaciousness to keep it going and enhance it and have it grow, because it touches so many lives in so many different ways, and truly makes a very real difference. So thank you for your leadership and all that you do.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm Bill Cirone, thanking you for joining us and signing off for this edition of Cirone on Schools.